Morning. My name is Chris Burr and I'm a tutor at St Padarn's with responsibility for Continuing Ministerial Development, or CMD for short. Welcome to the second of our series of 8 webinars looking at the challenges and opportunities afforded to us by digital or online ministry. An area of ministry which really has shot to prominence in recent months as churches have had to rapidly reimagine their function and purpose. Now, each of these 8 webinars will look at a different aspect of digital ministry, and you can find details of all of them along with a link to book yourself in on the St Padarn's website. And you'll find the link posted to the chat box as I speak. Now, just before I introduce Peter, who's our speaker today, just a quick explanation of the format this morning to help things to run as smoothly as possible. Peter will speak first of all for up to a maximum of 45 minutes, after which we're going to set aside a maximum of 30 minutes for questions and answers and possibly some further discussion as well. The timings of each may vary a little and we may not use our full-time allocation, but however it pans out, I promise that we'll bring things to a close by 12:15. Now, if you'd like to ask a question at any time, you can submit those via the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We won't interrupt Peter's presentation, but my colleagues Veronica and Jen, who are working hard in the background today, they'll monitor these as we go along, and we'll use those questions as the basis for our Q&As at the end. However, Peter's will be using quite a few slides as part of his presentation, and all of those will be available through a link at the end of the webinar. If we have a few questions broadly asking the same thing, you'll probably find that we'll just dismiss some of those and use one of them. So don't be offended if your specific question isn't asked. It's just that we've probably already received one that's very similar. And if you want to remain anonymous when you ask a question, just use the anonymity feature that will come up and then your name won't show. Don't worry if you miss anything today or you want to hear it again, as this webinar is being recorded and you can revisit it at any time via the Ministerial Hub on the St Padarn's website. I'm pleased to say that Tuesday's webinar with Bob Jackson has already been uploaded for anyone that missed that or would like to view it again. And finally, you'll automatically receive a feedback request via email in the next couple of days. It's very short, very straightforward, but we're learning as we go along with these webinars. So it would be really useful to know if we've got it right or if there are things that we can do better. So notice is done. It's time to introduce today's speaker, who is the Reverend Dr. Peter Phillips. Peter's the director of the Codec Research Centre for Digital Theology in Durham and is responsible for developing the world's first MA in digital theology. And as all of that would imply, he has a passion for exploring the interface between all things digital and theological. He's one of the key contributors to the field, and his expertise has seen him invited to speak widely at major international conferences. Now, if Peter's been in demand in the past, then he's become one of the go-to people for thought and insight over recent weeks and months as the church has rapidly had to reimagine its mission and ministry and theologically grapple with the implications of rapid digitization. And so it's my great joy to welcome you, Peter, and we're very grateful for you finding time to be with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for this warm invitation to share with you. I'll get cracking. I'll share my screen first of all, and 45 minutes might go very, very, very quickly. Excellent. So I hope you can see that screen. And I'll just do something a minute over here. Excellent. Okay, so let's jump in. I hope you can see the screen. With Zoom, I always find I never really know whether people can see it now or not, but I trust you can. Let's talk first of all about iPresence and what we're hoping to do during this period. There we are. So Just trying to get chat up and everything like that so I can check. First of all, this is a kind of outline of what I want to do this morning. First of all, to look at iPresence, this idea of real and embodied presence, even online. And then I wanted us to jump into thinking about what has God taught us about his mission, Missio Dei, during lockdown. Thirdly, to look at some dangers and opportunities of what digital or hybrid church, or whatever you want to call it, blended church, or whatever you might want to call it, might provide. Fourthly, to look at a definition of hybrid church, and then finally to look at digital ministry in a hybrid church. What does it look like, or what might it look like? Just some kind of ideas. My background, I'm a Methodist minister. I actually spent my university time in Aberystwyth and went to St Paul's Methodist Church there. I candidated for the Methodist Church from Aberystwyth and spent a lot of my time learning how to preach in the Welsh Valleys and in Mid Wales in wonderful places. I did Welsh my first year at university, so I know a little bit, but sadly not enough. And it's been a long time since I was at university, as you can tell. Let's go on to then iPresence. What do we mean by iPresence? I think that we need to be aware that presence is more than physically being there. And I think that we have this kind of passion, because we are fleshy beings, that actually being present in the flesh, as it were, is the best way, the only way that we can be present to one another. But I think something that lockdown and digitalization over lockdown has taught us, or reminded us, because people have been talking about this for the last goodness knows how long, is that we need to remember that we are more than flesh, that we are more than physical beings, that there's more to us than that. And theologically, of course, God himself is spirit. And we need to remember, of course, that the second person of the Trinity, so there's a bit of shorthand there, isn't there? Second PT, second person of the Trinity, became flesh. In other words, when we think about the Logos, the Word of God, we need to remember that theologically, there is a sense of there being both an en-sarkos Logos, an enfleshed Logos, but also an a-sarkos Logos, the second person of the Trinity prior to the incarnation. So just need to be careful about this kind of valorization of incarnation and physicality. We need to remember as well, as hopefully Bob was saying last week or on Tuesday, that physical presence is simply not possible for some, for the disabled, the vulnerable, for the housebound, and the fearful. It's really interesting that as we've all gone online and jumped into the digital church, we're actually colonizing a space where there are already people embedded in digital. And so people like Disability in Jesus, The Ordinary Office, You Belong, and others have been online for a long, long time, already doing digital worship, already fully present in an ecclesial community, a community with ecclesial depth, you might want to say. And we would need to be very careful that we don't deny them their presence and their sense of being online in the digital space. They're as much part of the body of Christ as the rest of us. And Bob will have explored the possibility, the definite necessity to welcome all people in a post-COVID church, wherever they feel safe to be. I was talking to a church yesterday, and they reckon that about 33% of people want to come back to physical church, but 66% of the church don't. They're happy with being online, and they feel safer online. Indeed, for many of our elderly people, it's so much easier to get up and sit in front of their computer screen or their television for YouTube or something, and receive or engage in, much better engage in the worship that way. And hybrid church is a way of trying to get around those, saying, is it okay to watch church online, to engage with church online? How do we bring those anonymous viewers that we now have into active engagement with the physical church as well? But let me just kind of do a bit more on this issue about presence. Presence is more than physically being there. You know that at the moment this Zulu greeting, I am here, you are seen, is going around. But I am here doesn't necessarily mean that you are seen. It could be a case that actually I am here, but nobody really sees me. Nobody engages with me. Nobody says a thing to me. I'm here, but I don't know a soul. I am here, but so are 3,000 people. I think it's J. Kim in his book Analog Church, talks about the possibility of, is there much more engagement between physical church, where in a mega church setting, where you might have 3, 4, 5,000 people in the same auditorium, and digital church, where through a Zoom service you might be able to see 40 other people and connect with them. I go to a Zoom service regularly, and I do recommend them because they're great places of encounter, great places where people can say hello to one another and wave and laugh, and you can hear that joy and wonder of engagement and connection going on. But also, I'm here, but my disability makes you blind. That sense of not being available. We did a webinar a couple of weeks ago for Premier on where I also work as a head of digital theology, on digital inclusivity. And Tanya Marlowe, who suffered for many years with ME, asked the question again and again, are physically disabled people welcome in the church? And answer the question really strongly to say, not really, because there's no place for us. And if we want to be there online, you valorize physicality in such a way that we're not enabled then. We're kind of seen as second-class citizens if we only turn up on the screen. Is it okay to say, I'm here on my screen, safe at home, this is where I want to be? And indeed, then going back into the spirit at the bottom of this page, I am here watching over you, the Spirit of Christ, the I am. Hybrid church seeks to kind of say that physicality and presence and intentionality is actually, for presence, intentionality is much more important, and focus is much more important than physical presence, as it were. In other words, you can be physically present but completely and utterly absent. When I get into my digital phone or what have you, then I know that I am physically non-present to the people around me. I just get immersed into it and I just do my stuff and everything and what have you. And there have even been times, I'm ashamed to say, when I've ignored my wife because I've been so immersed in the phone. And she can hear this because she's just at the other side of that door. Sorry, Teresa. I am here. I am waiting. I'm praying. A sense of intentional presence, intentional focus in what we're doing. I'm here on my phone reading my Bible. I was kicked out of Durham Cathedral once for reading my phone, for having my phone out. I was actually reading the Bible. I was meditating on the Bible in Cuthbert's shrine, and I was asked to leave because I wasn't allowed to have my mobile phone out. I am here on Zoom praying for the preacher. I'm here anonymous, listening to God. I'm here at the pulpit, meeting eyes and the camera lens. We are here, the church triumphant, joining in our praise. We don't believe that worship is just us meeting physically. We believe that we join with all the church, both militant in the world, alive today, worshiping around the world, but also triumphant, the church in heaven, joining in God's praise. We hear the body of Christ, online and offline, one body. So at the beginning of this, I want to just query the idea about physicality and whether physical presence is the only way that we can connect. And we may want to say, yes, it is the best way, because actually we are physical beings and that's what we do. But also some people jump on and say, actually, incarnation is important because Jesus is incarnate, therefore he represents the way to be human. And that's true as well. But incarnation is not necessarily the goal for us. Participation in God is the goal for us. So Irenaeus and Athanasius, both in their own ways, explored the concept of theosis or divinization. He became what we are, that we might become what he is. In the end, incarnation was a way for Jesus to identify with humanity, to be one of us, flesh of our flesh, bone of our bone, one who could die for us as a human being, whose sacrifice could actually make a massive difference for our lives. And yet we need to remember that our end goal is to be partakers of the divine nature. Yeah, though Christ died and went to heaven as a human being, still with the scars of the crucifixion, still he changed in that moment after death. That, you know, he says to Mary, don't touch me. He kind of, he can walk through walls, he can kind of rise and ascend to heaven and so on. And he can appear in heaven as the lamb that was slain. Christ became flesh, but we are always in flesh. Even online, we're in flesh. Here I am, I'm itching and scratching and what have you, and I'm bold and I'm grey, and you know, I'm real. I'm not a figment of imagination. I'm not electronic. I am a real person speaking to you, who are indeed real people as well. Christ bore his flesh to heaven, but our flesh is renewed, is sown as a natural body, raised to a spiritual body, as Christ's body in the Gospels and Revelation. And we've kind of got to be very, very careful that we don't over-valorize materialism or over-valorize physicality, that perhaps it's a transcendent thing rather than the only thing. So, having talked about that, and we may want to come back to that in the conversation, let me move on to what has God taught us during this period. First of all, very early on, we began to pick up ideas that a number of people were jumping online to engage in worship. So 93% of Catholics attending online worship, both from a York St John survey and noted in the tablet, 66% were using live streaming regularly. Then in the Telegraph, even before that in March, Google reports surges of prayer, searches for prayer surging by 50% worldwide, especially in poorer nations. We've got some more figures about that in a minute. And then Savanta Comres began to do some partner surveys with a number of groups where more people were seen to be attending online worship than usually attend offline worship, and we'll look at some actual figures about that in the moment. At the time in March, it looked to be probably twice as many. As Bob may have said in the Everyone Welcome Online webinar, we think that's probably higher now than that. Often those people are linked to the church already, so it's kind of the broader connections that we have, and often there were younger people who were attending. Over in America, Pew Research began to do some research about faith becoming stronger during the lockdown. And so here, all US adults, you can see that their faith has become stronger. 25%. Those who are Christians are 33, 35%, and so on. Protestants very strongly, and so on. So there is a sense that COVID crisis creates a kind of upswell of religious engagement and religious understanding. We've just done a survey at Durham with Comres Savanta as well. We're trying to get Savanta Comres. Sorry. We're trying to get a press release for this to give out all the data at the moment. And we were kind of very intrigued by this slide that we found. And this is when we asked everybody, this is a representative panel of the whole population of the UK. What's it been like during lockdown in regards to your offline and online faith-related activity? And you can see that it's quite interesting because I've linked them here by age. So blue is 18 to 24, orange is 25 to 34, grey is 35 to 44, and then 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 plus. You can see that actually younger people are very, very engaged in prayer, in meditation, in worship, in the exploration of nature. Everybody is in choir and yoga and so on. So faith-related activity seems to be part and parcel of something that people are engaging with online. And that figure, especially for online worship, is very, very big. We think that in our survey, 27% of people are attending worship regularly. and by regularly it's once a month, the same as in British Social Standards social standards survey, social attitude survey. 27% needs to be compared with 7% as the normal attendance at church. So that's that's quadrupling the number of people who are attending church. Now, take on as well, we think that about 30% of existing church members are not attending online church. So you've actually got a bigger number of people who are engaging, who don't normally attend church. So lots of people attending hybrid church or digital church already from outside of that. I have to say the situation in Wales isn't quite as favourable as as we might find elsewhere. So here you see offline church attendance pre-lockdown. London, the faith capital of the UK, at 53%. Wales down to 22%. Online church attendance during lockdown, London at 43. You'll see there's a slip there, of course, and down at the bottom is Wales at 19%. So there is an issue about online church in Wales, and that may well be broadband access, that may be digitalisation, that may be because it's starting from a very low point in any case. And there are clearly national issues, cultural issues around attendance online, or indeed attendance offline. What else has God been showing us though? Because we talked before about the Telegraph argument that things increased during the pandemic. This is a chart I did some time ago now and should have updated, but you can actually see that the online church or online mass or online services did indeed increase during the time of the pandemic. People were searching for them, especially in the run up to Easter. Everything was exciting and what's happening and this is something new and so on. And you can see there has been a general decline. We found there's a decline especially in Zoom services as people get more used to them. But YouTube and live streaming on Facebook and everything, or multi-platform use has actually continued to increase throughout the period. And we've begun to do some short local research projects, micro research projects of individual churches where we see huge amounts of growth that are going on. But let me just take that as a kind of control slide, and let's go to the next slide. Because here you can see that you can have the online church here at the bottom, but actually the other search issues are prayer in blue, Jesus in red, and God in yellow. And you can see that those levels are huge. There's a massive kick, a massive surge in researching all of those. And indeed, that idea that 100% of people, or 100% search term for the focus upon God, that sense that God is being present within our culture and being engaged, people looking for God all over the place. So what has God taught us? First of all, he's taught us about inclusivity, that there are lots of people already online and we need to provide a way in which we can include everybody online. Those who are housebound, those who are vulnerable, those who are rich, those who are poor, those who are young, those who are old. How do we include all people potentially within this new life, as we saw in Everybody Welcome Online? But at the same time, we also need to recognise the digital divide. And one of the things that the church has done is to change all the tools that they were doing. So Bryony Taylor, who's a vicar in Derbyshire, started off with doing all the kind of high-tech streaming services, but then started linking up her sermons to the phone, so that when people could then phone up and hear her sermon on a normal phone. Other people are now linking Zoom to phone because you can just listen to the audio. You don't have to have the visual. Secondly, so there's a kind of multi-channel, multiplicity of different forms of technology, whether it's sending out service orders by paper in the post, or using phone technology, or using digital technology, and so on. Secondly, there's accessibility. We can now get to church, and this will probably continue even during as churches open. But there is also digital fatigue. It's tiring to watch videos all day. I was in a 3-hour video meeting yesterday and was useless for the rest of the day. It takes it out of you, this kind of concentration on the screen all the time, with the lights into your eyes and so on. And these pictures online, you know, of people kind of their eyes going red and what have you, because so many Zoom meetings. But digital fatigue is also about our digital teams are tired. How can ministry continue at this rate? You know, ministers have girded their loins, teams have girded their loins, as it were, and done digital, but now they're being asked to sit back and do yet more. Is that really possible? Two things that have really increased is spiritual devotion. And so the idea of morning prayer and evening prayer, or the offices, those have become very, very popular. And so more and more people are joining in morning prayer with their church leaders online. More and more people are coming to evening prayer or Compline and so on. And there's more people doing courses on discipleship or prayer or ministry or something. There's also a lot more anonymous viewers, and what we find is that people are viewing what's going on online and trying to explore what's happening. How, in a way, somebody said, it's a comfy chair behind the back pew. The sense that you can just turn up in your pajamas and watch what's going on in your local church, rather than go to this rather scary place, which is kind of behind a big door, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what they're going to say to you when you go in, and are they going to ask you to be the church treasurer on your first meeting? So the sense of it's a safe place to look inside church if you're interested. And I've already given you this statistic about how many people are happy to stay online. Here's some research we did at one of those micro-research projects at Beacon Lough in Gateshead. And you'll notice in the pink column in the middle of the average view times, these are most recent at the top down to the beginning. So at the beginning, down at the bottom, you see most people only watching 5 minutes of the service. They're just popping in, seeing what's happening, exploring what, you know, what do they do here, who's preaching and so on, who's talking. And then gradually, as you see, more and more people begin to engage for longer periods. So by the end of it, the average view duration is almost as high as the 45-minute sermon, 45 minutes service, not sermon, which is very, very intriguing. Next thing to look at is why do people go to religious services? And this is an old Pew Research Centre. It's not very old, but it's back to 2017. They go there to get closer to God. And this is 61% of people who go, yeah? This isn't for Christians, this is the whole population. Now, that's interesting, because if we take that back to all those anonymous people, they're coming to your services, they're coming and sitting on this comfy chair behind the back pew because they want to get to know God better. They want to come into connection with God and to see what God's up to. And I think that's really, really important, because it ties up with that search for God on Google. People are searching for God, and they're saying, actually, we think we can find God by going to an online service. We can see something of God, something of what the church is about, and something what the church offers to help us connect with God through this online stuff. And for those of us who kind of love the liturgy and the kind of, you know, the whole kind of physicality of church, that may seem very strange. But perhaps it's this idea that it's the first step, and we need to be able to provide that first step into the church for a scared people who want to come back to church, who want to come back to what's happening. But there are dangers, and let's look at some dangers. We're on the third of 5, so we're hopefully moving through. First of all, digital can seem to be frivolous, evil, or for the young. So I talked about a book by J. Kim, the Analog Church, which I've been reading a while, did some reviews on my Facebook page and everything. I'm not happy with the book. I think it's not a very good book, but there's a whole slew of books coming out from the States at the moment from pastors in mega churches who are saying digital, it takes our attention away and we need to get rid of it and we need to focus completely on analog church or vintage church. It's a shame that the book came out right at the beginning of the pandemic when we were all forced to go onto digital church. But we need to kind of be aware that there are people who feel that way, and indeed you may feel that way. The question is that true? Is it right that digital is indeed evil? Ephesians says God is in all, over all, and through all. And we need to be very careful that we don't begin to kind of say that God isn't in digital, God isn't in this technology, that it's something else. Secondly, we need to remember the digital divide. It's an economic thing that people don't have access to screens or don't have access to smartphones or tablets and so on. But it's also about broadband and the technicalities of things. We're trying to do some research here at Durham University where we can try and get a package together which we can send out to our care homes to enable people to connect through broadband, yes, and a tablet with pictures on and so on, but in a way that helps them to connect more easily, rather than cutting back on the technology. But that digital divide is also the fear of the unknown. Our elderly congregations haven't grown up with digital. They've either got to learn digital, as I have. I don't know about you. But also that means that our clergy and those who attend church really don't find digital to be the first place that they might want to engage, the first place of their kind of common use. So this is new ground, this is new territory, this is new context in which both to minister and in which to worship God. Fourthly, the lack of physicality has to be learned. How do we connect online? People have been doing a lot of the waving as they say goodbye on Zoom. That's really interesting. What are the protocols? What are the protocols of doing this? You know, I'm talking here to a picture of myself. I can't see you because we're in a webinar. So what does this mean? It's harder for me to engage with you because I can't see your eyes, I can't see your faces, I can't see whether you're falling asleep or whether you're finding this interesting or what. And it's really hard. It's just kind of one-way kind of thing. And therefore we need to learn interactivity better and learn interactivity all over again. And then there's also our ecclesiology. Is your church building a temple of God, for God? Is it kind of temple ecclesiology, or rather a body of Christ ecclesiology? That then, in fact, though we say the church isn't the building, it's the people. Deep down in our hearts, we believe actually that it's first temple, and then it's the people. The church building is absolutely crucial to what's going on. I've had some conversations with senior clerics here in England, who said to me that the church is the biggest mission statement for the church. It's the biggest part of what the church is about, and this idea that we have digital church just completely changes that and gets rid of our major mission point. Of course, hybrid church isn't trying to get rid of the churches as buildings. It's just simply saying they can be used in a different way, in a better way, to include more people. But is it only in church that we encounter God as well? Can we not encounter him wherever, in all, over all, through all? That God is everywhere, that we find thin places all over the place in order to encounter God. So along with the dangers, there's also some opportunities. First of all, technology isn't just digital. Remember, as I said about Bryony's work, and that's happening all over the place, that lots of different technologies have been used, phone, paper, mobile, lots of things that we're using, every technology possible to engage. And of course, we too have, the church is really good at technology. We were the ones who invented the book form, the codex. We were instrumental in Gutenberg Press. We are now experiencing what it means to be part of a digital innovation that we've not actually started ourselves, but need to be part of. And it may be that the COVID crisis is part of that technological shift for the church to catch up with the 21st century. There are, of course, a plurality of platforms that you can use. YouTube for live streaming, using the Premiere mode to allow a service to start at 10:30 and be seen for the first time or whenever you want it to. Zoom services where you can have lots of different screens with people. It tends to be a more kind of in-church focused one. Facebook where you can live stream and you can see people coming up. One of the best things I saw at the early was Miranda Threlfall-Holmes, who's it's a bride church in Liverpool. And Miranda was one of the first people to jump on to the doing morning prayer or evening prayer on her Facebook Live. And she said at one point, let's have some silence. And we did. And then she said, and now speak into, type in your prayers into your phone or your device or whatever. And as people typed in their prayers floated up the screen. And you had this almost sense of incense rising into heavens as people connected with God in that way. It was fantastic. There are Google Hangouts and so on, and Microsoft Teams as well. The latter two hardly ever used, or used very, very little. YouTube and Zoom and Facebook have really got the kind of their market, as it were. A number of people are using Zoom coffee meetings or prayer groups or WhatsApp groups to make connection. A Zoom coffee meeting simply means you bring your own cup of coffee, have a Zoom breakout group or a Zoom meeting, and then you can chat with people and say, you know, how are you doing, and listen to other people and just engage with people, see people. That's really, really important. Prayer groups where we learn about, you know, you say using Pete Gregg stuff or 24/7 prayer or all the other possibilities, where you teach your church how to pray more, and then perhaps go into prayer meetings and so on that engage. WhatsApp groups to connect people, send them texts and so on. This idea that we can connect and be united as a body more and more and more. Some people are arguing that Zoom meetings and prayer groups and what have you are connecting the church more than they've ever been connected during physical church, because, you know, sometimes physical church is looking at the back of somebody's head and listening to somebody up front who's doing all the talking. But actually these new places can be much more engaged and connected. We've talked about the ecclesiology, the church is the body of Christ, the whole body, and perhaps this is the model that we need to do. How do we include the whole body of Christ, the housebound, the vulnerable, the lonely, the fearful into what we're doing, as well as those who come every morning? It does ask, what does it mean for the body to be multi-located and to be streamed? And I think that's a theological issue which really does need to be dealt with. Not dealt with, but explored. Because what does it mean for some of the church to be here physically in the building, but some of the church to be located elsewhere? What would it mean to have the housebound on a screen over there, or the vulnerable, or people who just, you know, who've now live away or can't get there this morning? How does that work? And finally, digital as an authentic thin place. I've had a few experiences over the last few months of actually being in a Zoom call or watching a church service and sensing the presence of God. That's an important thing to try and develop. Can digital be a thin space? You know, like the thin spaces that we all know, whether that's at the top of Snowdon or Lindisfarne or wherever it might be for you. I'm drawing towards the end of my presentation. I've got 2 more sections, but hopefully I won't use up all the 45 minutes. What is hybrid church? Well, hybrid church is something that's developing, and don't get hung up with the idea of hybrid. There's a big Facebook post on my Facebook page where people come in, people like John Drain saying hybrid, oh, it makes it sound like a Toyota Prius. Hybrid's a scary word. But hybrid is simply saying that there are 2 different things going on here, that hybrid brings things together that aren't normally together. So, for example, the idea of physical church and digital church both having a role to play at the same time. Now, you might say, well, however might we do that? How do we merge physical church and church online? or indeed have what I've said here, the best of both worlds, giving people the choice to be where they can, to be where they feel safe, to be where they experience God, to be the body of Christ. A friend of mine, Gareth, he talks of his own experience in church, where they're trying to develop this by having a screen with people on Zoom who are there, who are kind of connecting into the service, and they can see the congregation can see them. But they will be asked sometimes to do the reading for the day, or say some prayers, or to lead a song or something. And sometimes the people in the physical church will. They're connected with one another, and they can then connect in coffee time as well, where they can kind of say hello to people, and you can go up to the screen and have a chat with them and so on. So this sense that you have one congregation, but located in different places. Allowing people who aren't able to come to church still to be part of church, still to be physically present. Incorporating as well physical, digitally present members of the congregation into the corporate act of worship. Okay. Secondly, we've seen, this is a quote that I've from a book that we've just done for Grove Books on meeting God online during the lockdown. We've seen that this church without walls is a church of many faces, of choirs, of music groups, of impromptu readers and people leading prayers, of those from BAME communities, of those doing all age crafts, of key workers and COVID volunteers. This is a church where the housebound are welcome, the disabled can play a full part, and those in care homes are included. Church with a human face, even when that is a blackboard and table at the end of a garden path. You've got to buy the book to kind of see what that last reference is. But part of the vision for hybrid church is this idea of including those who haven't normally been included into our worship. It's not about excluding anybody. It's not saying that we need to do a digital church only. It's actually saying, let's do both. Let's do physical and digital at the same time. And that does query one of the things of how do we do this? How do we give the time? And that's the issue that churches are looking at the moment. Ministers all over the country trying to explore how do we engage in both of these things at the same time without actually burning out. A more kind of a lyrical kind of way to do this. What's hybrid church? It's space for all to be. Space for all, either proximally present or online. Space for all to encounter the divine as embodied humans together. Space for all to share at the table, altar, cross with an equal voice. Space to grow into God's calling for our lives. Space to share around the Lord's table. Space to strive for justice for all. It's church. Now, as a Methodist, where online communion is still banned in the British Methodist Church, though not in the Irish Church and not in many European churches or in many of the dioceses of the United Methodist Church, there is a huge issue, isn't there, about Eucharist and how we do that. How do we do this third last one, space to share around the Lord's table? It's that's something we need to come to terms with. Whether we do it through extended communion and we consecrate the elements and then send them out, or whether we kind of get over our understanding of what consecration means, that God consecrates and God is able to make those things holy that other people bring to the table. But that's probably another huge seminar that will need to come up later. I see there's a question already about that. So digital ministry in a hybrid church. I don't think that digital ministry is any different from normal ministry in normal church. Not much changes about the basics of ministry: preaching, praying, pastoring, shepherding, feeding the flock. This sense of how do we be there for the congregation? How do we connect with them? How do we help them to move on in their own discipleship? All remains the same. Those are the prime things that we need to do. what we've had to do over the lockdown is to slightly change our mode of communication to include more digital modes or more paper modes or so on, more distant modes. It may be that as COVID continues to rumble in the background, we still need to do that. We need to make sure our mode of communication for these things is appropriate to the style of ministry that we want to put across. But there's also, it's not just about the mode, it's also the technological shift, using digital to bring different elements of the congregation together. And I think it is time for the church to make that digital shift, for us no longer to be a medieval church, but instead to be a modern church, a church which embraces the culture of today. But yes, we do want to hark back to the sense that Christianity is a 2,000-year-old religion, which is part and parcel of a Judeo-Christian tradition, which is much older than that. But at the same time, we want to say it's appropriate and relevant to the people coming along today, to the people who want to engage today. And that means a cultural shift, a shift from changing digital from idol to icon. I think we've got something to do to change our understanding of what digital is about. Jean-Luc Marion talks about an idol as something which is simply a self-reflection of itself. It's simply a selfie picture of itself, something that doesn't have any meaning beyond itself. And to some extent, digital is there, but digital is selfie, TikTok stuff. But Jean-Luc Marion says an icon actually points to the depth of meaning, as an overflowing of meaning, and argues that that is the church in the digital age, an overflowing of God's presence into the world. And to some extent, we need to move from seeing digital as the idol through to digital as an icon, a place which is a thin place, a place of encounter with the living God. And also a missional shift, from centripetal shift, that everything comes into the center, everything's about the church, everything's about the locality, instead to a sense that God is omnipresent and we can find him anywhere. That we need to engage again with a missional God who is on mission everywhere all the time. I think it's 2 more slides, I'm sorry. Finally, use the tools of the contemporary age to empower contemporary people to follow Christ, to do good works and be holy. So perhaps Zoom for Bible studies where all can come, Facebook Live for daily offices, Zoom for housebound to join in physical church, prayer spaces, fellowship, encounter across screens, and even a rise in sacramentality. One of the things we're desperately trying to look at the moment is we're thinking of doing this on a global basis, so we have a global network for digital theology. And our global academics and everything are very taken up with the idea of the contemplative in digital. How do we do contemplative worship? How do we do contemplative prayer? How do we take up the digital disciplines, spiritual disciplines online and do those as well as we can online? Something that is definitely going to have to be researched is the massive rise in the daily offices. So that where you might get 2 or 3 people coming to evening prayer or morning prayer in the church, in the physical place, people are finding 20, 30, 40 people joining them for morning prayer, midday prayer, evening prayer, compline. This sense of the people of God coming back to prayer, coming back to sacramentality, coming back to a sense of devotional life that is alive and active, because they can just keep their slippers on and put their feet up and watch, or engage through their devices and so on, pray along with the prayers and so on. They don't have to go out into the wet, into the cold, even in a British summertime. So that's that rise in sacramentality. Perhaps the biggest thing to say about iPresence and hybridity is, yes, that there is a cultural shift here. A change in thinking, a change of what it means to think of ourselves as human beings who transcend our physical locality all the time, but especially in digital, by kind of now being present online, having a social presence online, a social engagement online. So there's a cultural shift in the way that we engage with digital and seek to kind of look forward into the future. And do you know, I think I want to go back to that slide because I think this slide is perhaps the most monumental. In this slide, we see that young people between 18 to 34, almost half of them are engaged in online faith-related activities. That's unheard of. We had a few inklings a few years ago in a book on the Bible and millennials, that millennials are more open to the Bible. And then Barna brought out some research, and then a number of other charities brought out some research and polls and so on. But now Hope Together, when we saw these figures from our Durham survey, I talked to Rachel Jordan-Wolfe in a webinar the other day, and she said, this missing generation, we now term them the open generation. The sense that the young people are really keen to engage. And if it's these people who are coming and being the anonymous viewers at our church services, how dare we close that down? Hybrid church is perhaps the greatest mission opportunity to engage with these young people and draw them into the spirituality of your church, of your congregation, of the body of Christ in your place. And that's really important. The church in Exeter, who has an online ministry, always argues that, always talks to people who've come to church for the first time, physical church for the first time, and they say, oh, well, we've been watching for the last month and a half online. It's fantastic to see what you do, and so now we want to come and be present. The research that Tim Hutchings has done on online church has always made clear, digital church feeds the local church. Okay, say that again. Digital church feeds the local church. Digital church never detracts from the local. It never takes people away and stops people engaging with the local church. It always feeds in, because in the end, we are physical beings and we will want to come and engage if we possibly can. What Hybrid Church says is, let's give an open door for that. Let's encourage those who are housebound to be part of that. Let's make church bigger than it can be if it's just physical. Thanks very much for listening, and I'm sorry for going along so long, but it's over to you now for Q&A.
Thank you, Peter. That was fascinating, to put it mildly, and some good questions to put to you. It's such a huge area, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's start with the first question. Some of these are from anonymous attendees, but what does curation look like in the iSpace, particularly for preach and laity? So this presumably is about, you know, what we collect and what we put out there. Got any comment that you can offer on that?
Yeah, so I think curation is absolutely crucial, because if we're going to be doing things online, then we need to have stuff to put online. So, for example, it's I'm trying to say how to say this. Our services are normally a collection of things that people bring together. So we you know, someone else will do a reading, somebody might bring something else, a song or a poem or whatever. So we often have to curate services rather than just one person doing it. And I think there definitely needs, for online services or hybrid church, to be this kind of multiple voices, multiplicity of possibilities. So one of the joys of online services is seeing other people's houses, you know, seeing the kids playing or having the kids involved and so on, having a testimony from people or having somebody at home praying and so on. So those things need to be filmed, and they then need to be fed into a Ustream, a collated service with some digital technology, and there's loads of tools around about that. But I think the curation is perhaps the same as it should be for our normal services. As we put services together, we should be curating things from other places as well. Is that kind of answering the question?
I hope so, Peter. Answered my question. That's brilliant. Now, something you touched on by your presentation. I'm jumping around the question a little bit, but there's a question from an anonymous attendee that said, could you say something with regard to sacraments, especially the Eucharist? And this is something that Margaret picked up on as well, Margaret Harvey. Obviously, we're a Eucharistic community, and she said, Eucharist is at the center of our worship. How do we do this in digital worship? And I'm just wondering, I think, Margaret, are you able to just want to expand on that a little bit for us and just explain Is that a concern of yours? Is that where you're coming from on that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this one up, because I've been puzzling over it all the time we've been on lockdown. I'm retired now, in inverted commas, and I'm 78, and I've been hiding away. The weekly Zoom services, the weekly services from the cathedral, because we're part of the cathedral congregation, have been absolutely tremendous, and the number of people taking part in them, they've been super. And as far as myself and my partner are concerned, we're both priests. So we simply use bread and wine ourselves and bring it in as part of the Eucharist on the Sunday. We can do that. But there's a whole group of people out there that aren't able to do that. And the Eucharist has been so much the center of our spirituality and our, not just our worship, but our theology. I'm puzzling over how we cope with this for people who aren't going to be able to get back to church, who are going to be afraid of going back into the church building for some time, and who have been on a sort of, what's the word I want? Who have been without the Eucharist for months now. What do we do?
Okay, thanks, Margaret. I noticed that Peter's already posted a link on the chat there to site called Bread and Wine Online. Peter, do you just want to sort of come back and sort of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So over on that link, it's a link on our Durham site where we have lots of COVID responses. But it's a kind of resource I pulled together from lots of different views about Bread and Wine Online. I'm part of the Methodist Church, as I said. By discipline, we're not allowed to do online communion, but I'm a very, very strong advocate for doing communion online. You know, my understanding of the physicality of the church, the presence of God online, in all, through all, and overall, my theology is that God consecrates the elements, and therefore God can consecrate bread that is in front of a computer screen in somebody's house, as well as the bread and wine that the priest consecrates in the church or in their kitchen or wherever they might be, and that we should be allowing people to share bread and wine as part of the communion service, that we are recognizing the body of Christ that is both physical and digitally present. And that by depriving people of that and saying that spiritual communion should be the norm, we are actually depriving people of the means of grace. And that goes back to Wesley, who said that communion was the most important means of grace, shouldn't be denied to people, and that it's a converting ordinance of itself. So seeing communion and seeing the grace that God gives us in communion is itself a converting thing. I'm gobsmacked that the church has kind of shifted to spiritual communion rather than making the jump over to say, actually, this is something that we should be providing. If only we had done this, then we would have enabled those who have died of COVID and what have you to have shared bread and wine before or during their illness or something, and that would have been a pastoral boon, a huge pastoral moment, to have been able to say, actually, we want you to be able to celebrate and receive the means of grace in this way. Sadly, the big churches, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Lutheran Church internationally, are not there yet, and I grieve that. But there's nothing really we can do. The church authorities are the ones who need to make the shift.
It does give an example of some of the theological issues that really come to the fore in the last few months, really kind of rapidly up the agenda. And it's interesting that even within the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic Church, you get different bishops kind of offering slightly different direction on this. So you can really understand why there's a lot of conflicting information that's out there, but you know, from a theological aspect, it's something that we're really grappling with at the moment. So it's Margaret, and I'm sure that there are many others that kind of would have posed that question. A really good question as well, Peter, for you. This comes from an anonymous attendee. It's about this idea about Christian community. And it says, how do you think the lockdown period has changed our theological understanding of Christian community? That's a multifaceted question, but maybe you'd like to just offer an answer to that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because first of all, we know 30% of people aren't attending, who are normal attendees of church, aren't coming to church online, and that may be a kind of personal problem they have with digital. They don't get on with it, or they can't get on with it. But there is this sense of, well, what is church about? There's also this sense of, is church watching, kind of absorbing something? So church is about performance. It is about theatre. You know, that's part and parcel of what we do. The liturgy itself is a theatrical reproduction of the Christ event, of the God event, as it were. And that sense of theatre is okay, but we've replicated that very, very strongly in our live stream services. But even our live stream services, you kind of saw that reproduction of what we did in church shift into people's homes and create a kind of more domestic environment. And so, you know, we had kind of little bits of people in their gardens or in their kitchens or from their desks or what have you. We have people playing and children playing and so on. This sense of the domesticity of Christianity, that Christianity isn't something about you know, posh things happening in church. It's actually about our lived experience every day. And so I think there has been a shift in our understanding of that Christianity is no longer seen just about what you do in church. It's about how you live your life all the days. It's become a kind of 24/7, you know, all life discipleship that London Institute for Contemporary Christianity have been telling us for so long, you know, Mark Green and his work and so on, that discipleship is part of our everyday life. And so Christianity becomes a homespun thing, a domestic thing, rather than it just being about the liturgy of the church and so on. So I think there have been shifts. I think that's going to take quite a while to kind of work through into books and kind of into our understanding and into our research as well.
Okay, thank you. A question here from Matt Batten, and he says, thinking about reopening and considering our digital and physical presence, do you think digital services should be different to services so that we can offer something unique rather than just replicating the physical? So again, I suppose this is about reimagining ministry, isn't it? And
that's right.
I'm interested in live streaming at the moment, but some churches being quite creative with that. Others are just literally, as Matt suggests, replicating on screen what's happening in a particular space. So again, have you got any comment on that?
Yeah, one of the dreams of digital church that we've kind of thought for a long time, and you know, we were thinking before about we're having some kind of technological dreams at the Centre for Digital Theology about how would we make a housebound member of the congregation feel present in actual church. And you know, we dreamt up things like putting kind of Google Viewer headphone eye things on viewer, and so they could kind of be transported as a kind of AR, augmented reality, into the church body. And of course, that's highly disruptive. Zoom and what have you have shown us that you can do it in a lot easier way. Simply allowing there to be some connection, visual connection between the church and the people. This sense of being welcomed into the church and heard. But it's one thing to be seen. Tanya Marlowe said this in our, she did a kind of liturgy that I want to put up somewhere sometime soon, but she did a kind of liturgy that she got from Augustine Tanaim from the Church of England, who won the Theology Slam event. And he said, you know, it's one thing to be, inclusion is kind of being accepted amongst the congregation. But actually, participation or engagement is when your voice is heard as well. It's not just being there at the table, it's actually having your voice heard at the table. And I think that some of our worship does need to shift to include people from the distant congregation or the distanced congregation into the physical location. So we actually acknowledge the fact that these people aren't just there on a screen or aren't just sat behind their their computer screens in their homes, they are actually part of the body of Christ as well. 1 Corinthians 11, Paul says, recognize the body of Christ when you come to communion. We need to recognize the body of Christ by acknowledging those people who aren't physically present, but are part of the body of Christ with us. So they need to have a verbal part of the service. They need to do readings. They need to do prayers. And that needs to be accepted, as well as it coming from somebody in the physical congregation. Now, those can be pre-recorded. They can then be kind of, put in the sound system or what have you, or be read out. Better still for somebody from a Zoom service, Zoom screen or something, to be able to speak those into the congregation and to be welcomed. And that does mean a technological problem for us, in that many of our churches aren't set up to do that, and so it may take time to develop it. I actually found I was alerted to a place called Altar in the States, which are providing a kind of hybrid solution for churches. It's going to cost money, I'm sure, but we can also do it in very, very kind of cheap kind of ways with our own laptops linked up to screens and so on. But I do think it means changing the way we do worship, because if we want to include the body, the whole body, we need to give them a physical voice in our services as well.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned about kind of church experience for a lot of people is looking at the back of somebody's head while somebody at the front kind of gets on and does it all. So do you think, after what we've been through in the last 3 or 4 months, that kind of desire for what people see on Zoom or Zoom coffee mornings, where in lots of ways it's much more interactive church than we've been used to, do you think that will lead into how we do church physically going forward?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think that there is this sense of interactivity and the multi-voice or multi-voiced or multi-presentational model is what people have really enjoyed online. They've been able to hear different voices sharing, and that means that how much we admire and love the ministers in our churches, there's actually a kind of sense that they're the professional Christians. The Reformation, if anything, put all the power into ministry rather than gave all the power to the people. And so there has to be this kind of shifting around in this new Reformation, where we begin to say, actually, let's hear the people's voices. Let's hear what Joe Bloggs down the road actually thinks about Christianity and how they live out their Christianity, as much as this person in front, who is the minister who's trained, who's the professional Christian. What are the amateurs like me supposed to do, and so on. So I think the more we can provide that. It's interesting that the story from Bryony's church, I think it is, she talks about how she asked one of her older ladies to do the service, to do some prayers, and she asked her husband, who never goes to church, to do to record her. And he said, okay, I'll do that. Men tech, what they like. And so he recorded her. And now he is a full part of what's going on. He's engaging in the church, he's engaging in worship, he sits, watches the service and so on. So this kind of participative worship actually is a missional thing. It leads people to participate in the worship as a whole, because we're asking them to do stuff. So I think kind of bringing the body in and recognizing the body is absolutely crucial.
A comment that's come in from Matt Batten, who said Facebook Live allows you now to bring other people into the live stream, something that I know different dioceses are exploring, to see the potential for including people who are not physically present. And I know Matt is part of one of our webinars next week, when we're going to look at sort of what a creative online presence looks like. When you see the different approaches of different churches to online, does your heart sink or does your heart soar?
No, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Whatever we can do is okay. And I think that there has to be so much experimentation at the moment. I also saw Kevin's question about bilingual service and everything. That's nothing. That's not really being explored at the moment at all. But the inclusion of other languages and how we do bilingual services and bilingual worship needs to be thought through. The tech that we use at the moment, most of us are kind of running along, or experimenting all the time, trying to think, how do we do this? How could we do it? You know, how do we do worship online? How do we get singing online? You know, one of the ways to encourage more singing is to turn the volume up, and to encourage people to have the volume in their houses louder, so that they're kind of, that it's not just their voices that they hear. But there's had to be the whole thing about kind of, how do we get a worship band to do the different instruments and then to get all that synced. The church has done amazing innovation over the last few months and what have you, and that innovation needs to continue. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, 1,000 ships rise, or whatever the phrase is, you know, because there has to be lots of different ways of doing lots of different things.
Okay, brilliant. I'm just conscious of the time, so maybe if we just have 2 more questions. And I'm not sure how rapid an answer you can give me to this one, as this is a question posed by Jessica. And she says, how do we as a church work to balance our understanding of human nature and human action as both material and spiritual? And how does this affect the way that we continue our ministry, both online and offline?
Good one. Good question.
Yeah, I'll let you go on that, Pete.
Yeah, so the church has always kind of oscillated between materialism and Gnosticism. And kind of Gnosticism says we're spiritual beings, and that you know, we just kind of celebrate and all of that. You know, Plato's whole kind of splitting of body and soul and so on, and saying, you know, so the soul's more important, we need to focus upon that, and the body is nothing, we can kind of get rid of the body or do with the body whatever we want to, and go into licentiousness. Or this other physical area where we are now, so the other area that we are, which says the body is really, really important, and we are human beings because of our body and so on. God made us as nephesh, a kind of, you know, a clay body which he breathes his own spirit into, the breath into. We are physical and spiritual beings. That's who we are. That our body, soul, mind are part and parcel of this miracle that is humanity. And I really think we need to do some major work on our theological anthropology, our understanding of who we are as human beings in a sense of what God is, but also playing around then with the concept of incarnation. And, you know, lots of people come back to me and say, physical church is important because we are incarnated beings. We're not. We're carnate beings. Only Jesus became incarnate. Yeah, became incarnate. He was made incarnate. The word became flesh, which suggests that he was pre-existent beforehand, as non-flesh, asarkos logos, the unfleshed God. Now, how we do that, we haven't really played around with enough yet. You know, that in the eternity, Jesus was always the second person of the Trinity. But in the economy of the Trinity, then there must be this sense that the second person of the Trinity has a pre-fleshly existence, just as our post-fleshly existence, our spiritual bodies in the future will be that. And how much conversation have we had around that in the past? I think Jessica's right here. There's a massive amount of work that we need to do about who we are. Are we just physical? Or is there something more to who we are? Margaret Bowden, sorry, one last one. Margaret Bowden, who's an atheist, computer scientist, AI specialist at University of Sussex, who is 80 years old and fantastic. Margaret says, the only time she comes very, very close to a Christian understanding of the world is when she tries to think of how the mind connects with our physicality. And it's so hard to work out that to limit us to physicality, because God seems to have been created in us something so much more than our physical cells and everything like that. And that's the mystery of our own incarnation, of our own existence. So yeah, let's do that. Let's have lots and lots of conversations about our theological anthropology. Sorry, that was a hard answer.
That's given us plenty to think about over lunch, Peter, that's for sure. Just before our last question, just comment off Claire there talking about attendance. It might be if you weren't here for Tuesday's webinar with Bob Jackson, go back onto the St. Padarn's website, have a look at that, play that through. I think that will show, help to answer your question. I think it's showing that we have lost people, but overall there's an increase because we're picking up a lot of new people as well, but have a look at what Bob's got to say about that. And final question, Aaron Aurora's with us on Tuesday talking about St. Nick's in Durham, who began a great ministry around daily offices, and particularly morning prayer and compline. The numbers there are kind of increasing all the time, really. Has it surprised you, the uptick in the number of people re-engaging with what's a very traditional kind of pattern of prayer, really?
No. I think it hasn't surprised me a bit. What surprised me the first time I noticed this was being at Durham Cathedral and their evening prayer. Their midnight carol service a couple of years ago, and as we got close to 11:30, whenever it was starting, hordes of young people came into the building. Okay, this is in the middle of December. All the students have gone. Durham's a small place. Where are all these young people coming from? Loads and loads of young people coming in to a service which is mostly in Latin and medieval songs and so on, and very high church, with incense flying all over the place and what have you. And you kind of think, oh, what's going on here? Because these young people shouldn't like this. They like boppy stuff and rock music and digital and stuff like that. And there's nothing digital here. What's going on? So Barn has done this research that actually young people like ritual, young people like the traditional. They want a sense of depth and meaning in their worship. They want to engage with God seriously, and therefore compline, a role of praying at different times of the day, a kind of pattern or a timetable for their day, provides sense within a mad digital world. And I think this is really, really important for the church to pick up, because we mustn't be doing kind of rave in the nave kind of anymore. What we really need to be doing is kind of working with those young people to find out what their spirituality is. Their spirituality may be more about climbing a mountain with a church congregation and having communion at the top of the mountain, or going into the forests and engaging with communion in the forest, or going to the beach early in the morning and having a service in Welsh that they don't even understand, but kind of can sense God's presence in that, and the sense of the other, the sense of what God is about in the bigger, wider world. Providing those thin spaces is what's happening, and I think that's what this is. The daily offices have provided a thin space for people in lockdown, and that's saying with my own experience of a particular service in a particular church, which has been a thin space for us, where the church has just kind of wallowed in God's presence, relaxed in God's presence. That's what young people want, and that's what we're seeing.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. So from everybody, Peter, Jess, thank you so much for your time today, and not just your time, but your insight. Certainly given us lots to think about, and really helped us to engage with some of the theological issues that are kind of going around at the moment. So very, very grateful to you for that. Just a reminder for everybody that all of the slides that Peter's used today are available, and I know that the link is there on the chat if you want to look at that, and there are one or two other links as well that Peter's put up. I just remind you that next week we continue this series on digital ministry, 2 further webinars, Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. We're going to look at ways in which churches have adapted their regular pattern. We talked a little bit about this today. So look at some examples. We're joined on Tuesday by Mark Ansell from Aberystwyth, from David Parry, who's leader of the Bro Cullinan ministry area in Conway, and somebody we've mentioned today, actually Aaron Aurora, who's the vicar of St. Nick's Church in Durham, where there's been such an uptick, as I said, in the traditional offices there. And then next Friday, we're going to explore ways to create and develop creative and effective online presence. And for that, Matt Batten, Director of Communications and Engagement at Llandaff, will be that, and Rana Khan, the Rector of Kirkcowell as well. So thank you very much for your time. As I said, there'll be some feedback coming out. It'd be really great if you can just take a moment to fill that in and send that back to us, so that we can continue to adapt and evolve the way that we do these webinars to make them as good as they can possibly be. Thank you again to Peter, and I hope the rest of you have a good day. Thank you.